And now the news. And this week, Audi's not R8, Ford's dementia era, and is internal combustion the next horse? VW seems to think so. So I thought with the new Audi Nuvolari, I would take some time before reacting to it. I know it's fashionable to get your opinion out there really quickly, but I wanted to sit and chew on this one for a little bit. I will point out that I didn't chew on it for so long that I forgot to do a video last week. The reason I forgot to do a video is because I'm still recovering from whatever continental virus I picked up while I'm on holiday. I'm assuming at this point it's going to be named after me, so I guess if this channel doesn't put out another video, it's because you can read about me and my disease in the latest scientific journal. I don't think the car is particularly ugly. The shock value is pretty high, because the first picture you see is of the front, and that front bumper is hideous. I was so taken aback by it that I couldn't really see the rest of the car, because, like, you know when you see something really ugly, and you just have to keep staring at it because you can't pull your eyes away? It's kind of like that. Actually, on that note, I figured out where they found the inspiration for that front bumper, and it's not where you think it is. Have a look at this picture over here. This is a screen cap from Need for Speed Underground 2, and even though that game is 22 years old this year, it's very obvious that the designers took some cues from these over-the-top body kits and said, yes, that's what the front bumper needs to look like. So no, Audi, you think you got away with it, but you didn't. Looking beyond that though, the rest of the car actually looks quite fine. Is it pretty? Not really. Is it period correct? I would say so. I think we are just in this kind of weird sort of design phase where everyone's trying to do something new and futuristic, but not quite sure if they want to go full send on it just yet. Nevertheless, it is a pretty nice looking vehicle if you just ignore the front bumper. Everything about the car actually looks pretty inoffensive. It kind of looks like what you'd expect from a modern R8, even though they say this isn't a successor to the R8. Interestingly as well, Audi didn't actually provide a pure side profile view of the car, only these weird top-down and back and front and three-quarter angles. Nothing from the side, which is quite surprising because usually that's one of the angles that they like to show off. Moving on from the visuals though, the car is limited to 499 units, but there may be a few extra if they decide to go ahead with the convertible version. It might not be an R8 successor, but it's still being influenced by it. The car is once again stealing a Lamborghini drivetrain, using the Temerario's V8 and hybrid system to make nearly 1,000 horsepower, and do the 0 to 100 kph sprint in 2.6 seconds, going on to 200 km an hour in 6.8. It also has a movable rear wing supposedly, although I can't find any pictures of that either, and lots of downforce to the car too. Honestly, it doesn't really matter because this car is never going to be driven hard, it's just going to be used as a vehicle to be seen in. If this car wasn't a limited run production vehicle, I think we'd see two things coming out of this. First of all, we would see people pushing these cars and actually using them the way they should be. Secondly, I feel like aftermarket tuners would do something about that front bumper. Inside the car is super basic. Apparently the VW group hasn't completely learned their lesson on touchscreens just yet, but this could be because the project was only started in March last year. They had to probably cut corners somewhere, and not going through the effort of installing a whole bunch of buttons versus just slapping a screen in is probably a fair way to do it. The car is very much a concept car made real rather than a halo production vehicle. And I must say, it's cool to see companies let loose a little bit and do something a bit wacky. I just hope that this front end doesn't become an Audi staple. Ford is a little bit confused. In America a few years ago, they were talking about how sedans are dead and SUVs are the way forward. Now they've changed their tune, and they've said they're open to having sedans again as long as it suits their needs. They've even spoken about potentially having a four-door Mustang. Nice in theory, but you can have a really great four-door V8 vehicle without it having to be called a Mustang. Something to think about. In Europe, they have gone completely insane. They got rid of the Fiesta and the Focus, which were good sellers over here a few years ago, saying that they wanted to focus on iconic vehicles, as if these two cars weren't propping up the whole company in Europe. Nevertheless, they persisted and watched sales fall off a cliff. Who could have seen that coming? Now they're bringing the Fiesta and possibly the Focus back again. It seems that their CEO's line about focusing on iconic names finally kicked in just a little bit too late. The problem is it doesn't seem either is going to be a Ford. Ford are really branching out and making partnerships with everybody who's willing to listen to them. The Fiesta is already confirmed to be a Renault 5 in the future. Don't believe them when they say that it'll be a Ford underneath and they'll change the dynamics and blah, blah, blah. The fact is they're doing this for a cost-cutting thing. They're not going to spend a million years redeveloping the whole car when it already works. The Focus might not even be a hatchback to begin with. It seems like they're considering making it a crossover instead. I wouldn't be overly surprised if they ended up basing it on the Renault 4. They've also said maybe, maybe not to some ST variants. Again, a nice thing to say, but let's be honest here, like with the standard Fiesta, a Fiesta ST will just be a rebadged Alpine A290 anyway. I do think it's both funny and sad that Ford have realized way too late how important the EU is, and that they're backtracking massively and pretending this was all part of the plan. They can forget about getting the same market share and profits that they used to get out of the continent. The fact is, the trust is broken, and coming back in now with cars that aren't actually Ford's isn't going to help things at all. And using nostalgia nameplates doesn't work unless you actually make a good vehicle. So if you look at the Ford Capri, for example, what is the current Capri has nothing to do with the old school Capri. But in saying that, you can do it right. The Renault 5 is doing fantastically at the moment because it really does bring back the memories of the original Renault 5. The Fiat 500 is another good example of taking an old car and making a retro variant of it. Honestly, I think that Ford have just been so thrown off by having to backtrack all of their work on EVs that they just don't know what to do anymore. They're doing well enough in the US, but outside of the US, they seem completely wayward. As much as they might tell us that all of this is part of the plan, it looks to me like they're too scared of committing, which is why they're going into partnerships with various other brands and getting them to build the vehicles that they just rebadge. They don't want to put the resources into a technology or a type of vehicle because they're so scared that regulatory changes could screw the whole thing up. I can appreciate that, but the thing is, nobody remembers anyone who played it safe. A VW boss with a title bigger than his company's profits has said that internal combustion cars will become like horses. The first thing I want to say is that Jay Leno's been saying that exact thing for years, so don't pretend that's an original thought.
Cars like Ferraris, Lamborghini, in the same way that people use horses now. And most of them are for pleasure. People enjoy them and they ride them.
The second is that he's probably right. The point he makes is that as the general public see the benefits of EV versus ICE, internal combustion will naturally become less popular. That in turn will mean less purchasing, that in turn will mean less production, and eventually the internal combustion engine car will become niche, kind of like when horses did when cars became better. This means that the only ICE cars left will be the ones that enthusiasts actually want and that they can prove will turn a decent profit. Another thing he said is that it's stupid to push these hard deadlines for EVs and getting rid of internal combustion, and that it's better to let people find out the benefits themselves, so that they will move over to the new tech organically, rather than being forced to stop using the old tech. Now, I have points for and against this. On the for side, where I agree is that you cannot tell people what to do. It never, ever works. They need to be convinced through either experiencing things for themselves or through general social norms. It's kind of like how people said, I will never give up a manual gearbox, until automatic gearboxes became so good that sitting in traffic with a manual just didn't make sense. And before you all get on your high horses, I'm not talking about enthusiasts here, I'm talking about the general public. The reality is, most of us, yes, we do prefer a manual, but we are the minority. As hard as it is to hear, we are the minority and the general public just doesn't care. The next positive point here, and it's something that he actually said himself, is that there was never a ban on horses to get people to start using cars. There still isn't a ban on horses. If you want to go out right now, you can buy a horse. The thing is, a horse is expensive and it's difficult to maintain. The only time a horse is cheap is when you're finding it on your supermarket meat aisle. But the point stands that you can go buy a horse right now. It's not against the law. Another point I can think of is that as the infrastructure improves for EVs, it's natural to move towards the technology that suits it. If charging stations were better and more like petrol stations are, or it was much easier to charge your car at home for most people, you'd probably find that EVs would be picking up a lot quicker. And now to get onto the against points, because it's not all good here. The one thing I will say is this is a very privileged take from him, because he's not actually considering the third world that does make up a huge percentage of car ownership. It's easy to sit and say, oh, infrastructure isn't very good here. But the fact is that in a lot of third world countries, including the one I came from, electricity is more of a problem than the infrastructure. Forget charging your car, you can't even power your house sometimes. So to say that people will organically just move over just because the car is better, that's not necessarily true. It depends on other factors beyond just whether EV or ICE are better. The other point I want to make against is that companies need to maximize their shareholder value. Do we like it? Obviously not, but that is the reality we sit with. This means that they don't want to run 10 different kinds of production lines to handle ICE, EV, and all the variants in between. They would prefer if everybody just shifted over to EV in one big go, because that means that they don't have to spend as much money catering to the masses just to keep some profits. They would rather do a clean switchover and make as much money as possible, screw what the consumer thinks. Once again, I come back to saying that this is a very privileged point of view, because if EV sales didn't have that giant pullback, he would have been told by the higher-ups, you shut up, we're going EVs, keep your opinion to yourself. It's very easy to sit here in hindsight and say, oh yeah, I knew what was going on. But did you? And if you did, why didn't you do anything about it? Oh, and there was actually another point I wanted to make. There is still a large market for ICE vehicles. It's not like everyone's suddenly forgotten all about ICE and doesn't want anything to do with it anymore. Like, the point is, not everyone's going to be convinced by EVs. That's just a reality. Even though I say the general public will go after them, it's not necessarily true. You probably will find that a fair percentage of them will actually say, you know what, I don't actually like the way this EV works, I'm going to stick to what I know. So this brings us back to the question at the start. Will internal combustion engine cars become like horses? I think, given a long enough time horizon, yes. I just think that with the regulatory changes and with manufacturers wanting to streamline their productions and only focus on platforms that actually work for them in the long term, internal combustion engine cars are just going to be phased out organically. The ones that will likely survive are the ones that are heavy enthusiast cars or collector's items. Your Toyota Yaris's, your VW Polos of yesteryear, those are all going to end up in the bin and they're not going to be replaced by an equivalent. We're already seeing that happening with the Polo right now. My hope for internal combustion engine cars that aren't collector's items is that there's a sufficient support network kept in place to keep these cars running so that we can still appreciate them long into the future. What did you do the last time you were desperate for money? Don't answer that. Well, Nissan is going into Airbnb, except it's more like Airbnb Factory. They're going to be renting out half of their UK factory to Chery, the makers of JQ and other Chinese brands that are busy taking over the world right now. It seems like a weird move, but Nissan is only using about 50% of that factory's capacity anyway. The expectation here is that the move is going to help both companies because Nissan needs the money really badly, and sitting on half a useless factory doesn't help at all. Chery, on the other hand, needs to start manufacturing within Europe because of all of the tariffs that are coming in on Chinese vehicles. They're following Leapmotor, who are doing a similar thing through Stellantis by opening some factories within the EU to get around these tariffs as well. What I did find interesting about this is there's not many mention of new jobs, so I'm not really sure if this factory is just going to be full of robots. Usually when something big like this happens, there's always a PR statement that talks about how local jobs are going to be created and such, but as of right now, nothing has been said on that. Granted, this is supposed to only kick in next year, so chances are they haven't finalized all of the details yet. All of this is against the backdrop of car makers in Europe having issues concerning Brexit-related tariffs. The EU set a deadline of 1 January 2027 for a certain amount of a car and its battery, if it's an EV, to be made within Europe. But because the world isn't that simple, it just isn't possible for these targets to be met. And because the car trade between the UK and the EU in both directions is so big, I wouldn't be surprised if we saw China throwing its weight behind getting these tariffs delayed even further. If that doesn't happen, and these tariffs do go into effect at the beginning of next year, Nissan may have to prostitute itself to another manufacturer that needs a production line. And now it's time for the recalls. Except it's not time for the recalls, because I've decided this segment needs to die. I've been umming and ahhing about it for a while already, and while I do feel like it probably does provide a little bit of use somewhere sometimes, I feel like I'm just on repeat throughout the whole segment most of the time. And I can only make so many jokes about an engine exploding, or a brake failing, or a seat that doesn't work properly. It's starting to feel a little bit stale, and I don't really want a segment that just exists for the sake of existing. So going forward, I don't think there'll be any recalls. If it really is such a problem and I see 2 billion comments saying bring back the recalls, sure we can do it. But I'm highly doubting that'll be the case. And that is the end of the news.